Well, we're still waiting for the outcome of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals hearing in the challenge of Illinois' gun and magazine ban, but there's plenty of other action in the realm of Second Amendment rights and the courts that we've got to talk about. Good morning, back at it on this Wednesday, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. You can always contact us live and local at 217-629-7970. I'm pretty sure we got the phone situation all figured out now, so if you can't make it through, please do email me and let me know so we continue to troubleshoot. bishoponair@gmail.com, bishoponair@gmail.com. But the best way to try is to give us a call at 217-629-7970. So, of course, we're waiting for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals and their decision. I'll actually re-air some of what we had a conversation with Robert Beavis from Law Weapons about the next steps he sees in that case. But there's other stuff going on, including the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday essentially reversing an order from a lower federal court concerning the federal government's rule through the ATF on frames and receivers. And this is in the space of what some people characterize as ghost guns. But really, the conversation is just about firearms that are able to be manufactured at home. And it's long been standing that you can have a firearm you make yourself at home, and it doesn't have to be serialized as long as it's for your own personal use. And the only time it needs to become serialized, from how I understand it, is if you look to transfer that firearm to somebody else. So it's been the longstanding rule, but then you get into the conversation and adding to the discussion this idea of parts like frames and lower receivers for an AR-15, which really is just a hunk of metal that might be what some have known as 80% finished. So it's got some holes in it, but it's not completely drilled out entirely to be a functioning receiver. You've got a variety of different companies out there. Defense Distributed is one of them. Cody Wilson has really been spearheading this idea of being able to make and drill these lower receivers with milling machines. They actually sell machines called ghost gunners that you get an unfinished hunk of metal and you put it in, and then you get a computer-assisted design program, a CAD program of whatever type of lower receiver you're wanting to finish, and then it'll drill it out and it'll finish it up. That way you can then assemble the barrel and all of the other parts and the hammer and the trigger and springs and whatever else is needed for that particular firearm. So when you have this concern of people en masse making their own firearms using these types of technologies, then you get rules like what the ATF put together, ultimately saying that they are able to regulate these lower receivers or frames despite being not finished. And there were challenges, of course. In court, you had a challenge in particular from FPC, which is the Firearms Policy Coalition, and they had a successful challenge in a lower federal court. And the lower federal courts put an injunction on the ATF's rule, but the U.S. Supreme Court essentially came in and put a stay on that injunction. Now, this is all legal speak for the process of which these cases can move, the trajectory of which these cases ultimately go. And when you have an injunction on a law, it blocks it from being implemented. Or in this case, an injunction not on a law, but on administrative rule. Then it blocks that administrative rule from being implemented. And the argument here is that the ATF can't just make up laws by administrative rule. And that is what the argument is that the ATF did here, and a lower federal court seemed to agree with that and issued a preliminary injunction, which there was celebration across the country of people supporting the Second Amendment, saying this is a great day. Moving forward, it's still uncertain, but the case continues. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday they issued a stay. It was a split decision, and part of the stay says that pending the disposition of the appeal in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit and disposition of a petition of a writ cert, if such a writ is timely sought, should cert be denied, this stay shall terminate automatically. So if they deny taking up the case, eventually then the stay would be reversed. In the event cert is granted, the stay shall terminate upon the sending down of the judgment of this court. So you had, again, a split court here with Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts siding with those who decided to put a stay on this. This isn't about the merits, and I think that's something that's important here to understand. This is only about the process, and we have this playing out here in Illinois as well when it comes to several different challenges. And in particular, you had the challenge brought by Law Weapons, Robert Beavis. He's the owner there up in Naperville, and he tried getting preliminary injunctions every step of the way. It's not based on the merits of the argument that, the firearms ban violates the Second Amendment. It's really an argument of whether this is an emergency and people are being harmed by this being in place. So the emergency preliminary injunction request in Beavis's case denied on the circuit court level, denied by the appeals court, went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They were considering this, but then the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals said, hold on, we're doing a rush to get a hearing on this, and we're dealing with this. Let the appeals court deal with this. So the U.S. Supreme Court denied taking up or issuing a preliminary injunction as the case plays out. So similar thing going on here with the ATF rule. It's not a ruling on the merits. It is a ruling on whether or not there should be a temporary hold on the rule from being implemented while the case plays out. Now, FPC, the Firearm Policy Coalition, they put out a statement saying they're deeply disappointed with the courts and pressing pause on the defeat of ATF's rule, effectively redefining firearm and frame or receiver under federal law. But they said that regardless of the decision, we're still confident that we will yet again defeat ATF and its unlawful rule at the Fifth Circuit when the court has the opportunity to review the full merits of the case. So again, it's not about the merits of the case. This is just about the procedural hold that can be put on something when the case is being moved through the courts. So I think that's important to note. But how are we seeing this play out in the case against Illinois' gun and magazine ban? I talked with Robert Beavis from Law Weapons yesterday late in the show. We'll re-air some of that because he's looking to file a lawsuit to the U.S. Supreme Court to force the issue of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, who has had the case for more than a month. The case challenging Illinois' gun and magazine ban from a whole bunch of plaintiffs groups, including Law Weapons and Robert Beavis. So we'll hear what he had to say. He's instructing his lawyers to do next. So stay tuned. We'll get to that next here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk, and you can always chime in live and local at 217-629-7970. All right, back at it, and you can call in at 217-629-7970 if you want to react to the U.S. Supreme Court issuing a stay on a preliminary injunction of the ATF's frame and receiver rule. You can do so, but obviously that's just one challenge in the courts that's making its way through the process in federal court. But something else that's making its way through federal courts is the challenge of Illinois' gun and magazine ban, where you had, the first case filed in state court from Thomas Mag that was then transferred to federal court, lumped in with several other cases that were eventually filed in federal court in the Southern District. And then you had the Southern District issue a injunction on the state's gun and magazine ban, but that only lasted 6 days. As the states then went to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and said, hey, there's all these other cases going on in the Northern District, including a case brought by Robert Beavis from Law Weapons, challenging not just Naperville's ban, but also the state's ban. So all these cases were lumped together in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. After different outcomes, a stay was issued on the Southern District's preliminary injunction. So obviously there's some things happening in that case where you had a hearing more than a month ago in the Seventh Circuit. And we're still waiting on the outcome of that particular hearing. But I talked with Robert Beavis yesterday from Law Weapons, and he's got a fundraiser coming up Sunday up in Naperville. There's a whole bunch of happenings. It starts, I believe, at 11, goes until about 3 or so, a fundraiser with a raffle and a whole host of things. But we talked about what the next steps are here, because Beavis, he, of course, has the case that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court looking for an emergency injunction while the case plays out. But the U.S. Supreme Court saw what the Seventh Circuit was doing, and they held off on issuing any kind of emergency injunction. We'll hear what Robert Beavis had to say yesterday. But, of course, we'll get your phone calls at 217-629-7970. Good morning.
Greg, I apologize for this. I tried to call yesterday, and it wouldn't let me. I don't know what's going on. It said something about call cannot be completed as dialed.
I think we got it figured out now. What's up?
Okay. So the case with the kid that stabbed the girl here and he kidnapped another person.
We're not talking about that, but we may at some point. I appreciate the call, but we do want to stay on topic because we've got very little time, right? But if you want to get more detail about that, go check out my YouTube videos where you can see where we talked about this in some detail yesterday. All right, so just search Bishop on Air and we can connect that way, and you can watch previous segments. But here's Robert Beavis yesterday chatting about what he thinks the next steps are and what he's actually going to be asking his attorneys to do in the challenge of Illinois' gun and magazine ban.
Yeah, we are the lead case, so all the other cases are attached to ours, and we expect to have some type of ruling soon. If we don't, I've instructed my lawyers to file another motion to the U.S. Supreme Court asking them to step in, because this is an emergency basis. People cannot buy guns, and our rights are being violated. A right delayed is just like denying our rights. So we're hoping to get a resolution very soon.
So again, Robert Beavis talking about how he's instructing his lawyers to prepare to file with the U.S. Supreme Court again to have them step in because he says it's an emergency. With the law being in effect, people can't purchase firearms. They can't, go to Law Weapons or to, your local gun store and purchase a semi-automatic firearm that's banned by the state legislature that Governor J.B. Pritzker enacted on January 10th of this year. So when we see that filed, of course, we'll cover that. But there's other litigation expected. Robert Beavis saying that Thomas Magg is actually collecting a whole bunch of those who got temporary restraining orders. Thousands of people got temporary restraining orders, preventing the state from enforcing the gun ban against them. Those are still in place until whatever happens in the Illinois Supreme Court, which we're still waiting on an outcome from the Illinois Supreme Court on the challenge from State Representative Dan Calkins. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I think we're all getting a lesson in really how the courts work when it comes to challenges of people who say their rights are being infringed upon, and how we go about seeing this play out, and the patience that there is. And some of you not too patient. Some of you obviously upset that it's taking this long, that they can take your rights away like that. And then it takes, almost a year to actually have some resolution to restore those rights. So a lot of moving pieces. We'll be watching this closely as we have each and every day. But Robert Beavis instructing his attorneys to prepare to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to step in because of the continued wait from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. You've also got some other lawsuits that are going to possibly deal with a law that the governor could sign maybe sometime this week, dealing with allowing the state to go after gun manufacturers or allowing the state to sue over how they advertise things. These are obviously some interesting times when it comes to the intersection of government regulation and constitutional rights. All right, follow along anywhere. You can just search out Bishop on Air. You can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and the YouTube channel where you can see video conversations that we've had on these issues and more. Let's go ahead and take a call before the news. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, Greg.
Hey.
Hey, I don't know. Maybe you know the answer to this. Is there any time restraints on the Illinois Supreme Court, or can they just drag this out until the law, until we have to have our weapons registered and it's too late, and then they have a registry of our guns, and then it goes to the Supreme Court and they flip it, and they still have the registry of our guns? Is there any time limit that forces their hand on this, or can they just Illinois Supreme Court just drag it out?
The answer to that is I don't know. Because one thing that you'll get from attorneys is there's no predicting a court's schedule. So typically, though, I mean, it could be several months, could be 30 days. But I mean, we've had the case at the Illinois Supreme Court for, I want to say it was heard in May. With the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals for the federal courts, it's been over a month, and they said that they were on an expedited hearing schedule so that they could deal with this because the U.S. Supreme Court was asked to step in the federal case. But really, I don't think it's the Illinois Supreme Courts where this is going to be decided. And maybe they're waiting for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to make their decision. You got different issues though at stake here. You've got in the federal courts the Second Amendment argument. In the Illinois Supreme Court, you've got the equal protections argument. So they are different arguments, but maybe the Illinois Supreme Court's waiting for the federal court to deal with it. Maybe the federal court's waiting to get to January 1st. I don't know. But either way, you got a lot of people out there waiting to see what happens here, including plaintiffs who are thinking about going back to the U.S. Supreme Court to force the Seventh Circuit's hand on this.
It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. I appreciate the call. It is Springfield's Morning News on WMAY.